Now let's spend a few minutes talking about decimals. I have here a very big number, and I want to remind you of what each one of these places are called. This 8 right here, it's in the ones place. 2 is in the tens. 6 is in the hundreds. I'm just going to read these out now. Okay, 5 right here, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, 10 millions, and we obviously could keep on going. These ones right down here, okay, sometimes these hang people up. This one right here is in the tenths position with the TH on the end. This is the hundredths position. This is the thousandths position, and this one's the 10,000ths position. And we can keep going smaller down to the millionths, billionths. It keeps going that direction just like it can keep going that direction. Now, being familiar with these decimal places is very important as we work with science, and you're going to find that's where you're going to be using numbers like this most often. So let's give you a reminder of rounding, because sometimes numbers get so long and funky that we have to round them. So we can round to lots of places. Let's say we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So what I do is identify which number is in the 10th position, and I look to its right. You look to its right. If the number to its right is 5 or above, then this number rounds up. If the number to the right is 4 or below, then it stays the same. So if I'm writing this number rounding to the nearest tenth, it would look like this: 23,045,628.2. If we wanted to round this problem to the nearest 100, then I need to identify the 100 position. This number right here is in the 100 position. So I look to its right, and it's a number that is smaller than 5, so it tells me that it's going to stay the same. So I rewrite this number right here. Okay, so 6 stays the same, and everything else becomes zeros. So this right here is that number rounded to the nearest 100. Let's round to the nearest thousandth. Thousandth, that's this number right here. I look to its right to see if it's number 5 or bigger. It's not, so that means 3 is going to stay the same. So if I round this to the nearest thousandth, it would look like that. Let's do one more. Let's round to the nearest 100,000. Okay, that's sort of a funny one to round to, but you can do it just as easy. I look at the number right here to the nearest 100,000. I look to its left. It tells me that since it's a number less than 5, everything else this number here is going to stay the same. So 0 is going to stay the same, and everything else becomes zeros after it. So this number rounded to the nearest 100,000 is 23 million. Straight up. Okay, let's talk about converting fractions to decimals. This is really easy because you need to understand that a fraction is just a division problem. This says 1/4, but it also says this, 1 divided by 4. And so if I wanted to do this problem, I could just pull up my little calculator, and I could put 1 divided by 4 equals 0.25. And so if you ever want to convert a fraction to a decimal, all you have to do is change it into a division problem. 2/3 is the same as 2 divided by 3. So if I pop that into the calculator, 2 divided by 3, I get this answer, 0.66666. It actually takes it to a 7, but it's rounding because that actually is 0.666. It keeps repeating, and if you remember, the way that we show repeating decimals is by putting a number over it. That says that this keeps going on 0.666 forever. Let's skip right down here and convert a decimal back to a fraction again. Okay? So I have 0.25. This is a decimal. If I want to turn it back into a fraction, then I need to read this out loud to myself. This 2 is in the tenths position, and this 5 is in the hundredths position. So the way to read this, you could read it 0.25. That doesn't help us though. The way to read this is 25 hundredths. And then all we have to do is just write what we just said, 25 hundredths. There we go. 0.25 is the same as 25 over 100. And then we obviously could reduce that. I'm going to leave it right in this that form for just a moment. Take a look at this one. 0.162. But you also can read this, okay, because this 2 is in the thousandths position. 162 thousandths. So I'd rewrite it like this, 162 thousandths. And then we could reduce that. That might take a little bit of a work, but it could be done. So 0.162 is 162 thousandths. Take a look at this one, 3.05. 3, this is a whole number, so I'm going to put it out in front. Okay? This says 0.05 or 5 hundredths, because this 5 is in the hundredths position. So I can rewrite this as 3 and 0.05 hundredths, which can be written as 3 and 5 hundredths, which, yes, is a mixed fraction, which I said I hate. I'm going to leave it like this right now, though, because you can see how we get from one to the other. So let me show you this one more time right here. So read it out loud when you see a decimal, 25 hundredths. That's 0.25, but it's 25 hundredths, so then I can just write it like that. This is 162 thousandths, so I could rewrite it like that. Okay, let's move down into adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing decimals. Now, the best way to add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals is a calculator. However, sometimes you don't have one, and so let me remind you 2 things you need to remember. One when adding and subtracting, and one when multiplying and dividing, if you do have to do it by hand. When you are adding and subtracting decimals, line up the decimal points. See this decimal point and this decimal point? They have to line up when you want to add and subtract. Have to, or you will not get the right answer. When I line them up, then we can just add by hand here and get our answer. If you do not line your decimal points up, you cannot add or subtract decimals. Multiplying and dividing, however, you don't have to do it. Okay, you don't have to line them up when you multiply and divide. What you do have to do, though, is worry about it at the end. Okay, so now I'm just going to do my multiplication problem here. 5 times 3 is 15, carry a 1. 5 times 4 is 20, add 1 is 21, carry a 2. 5 times 1 is 5, add 2 is 7. Now here's the crucial point when you're doing multiplication with decimals. Count how many numbers are behind the decimal point. That has 1 number, that has 2 numbers. There are 3 numbers behind the decimal point. Therefore, I move in 1, 2, 3 spaces with my decimal point to get my answer. So the crucial thing when you're multiplying decimals is to make sure that you move your decimal point to the right point at the end here. Dividing decimals. If you have to divide a decimal by hand, first of all, write the problem. I am going to divide 1.43 times 0.5. But you don't want to divide by a decimal. I'm going to actually move this decimal place 1 that way. So to be fair, I'm going to move that one way too. So now I'm going to rewrite the problem as this. 5 divided into 14.3. So you can see this decimal point moved 1 here, and this one moved 1 here. Now I can do the division problem. 5 goes into 14 2 times. 2 times 5 is 10. Subtract and get 4. Bring down the 3. 5 goes into 43 8 times. 8 times 5 is 40. Subtract. Okay, bring down a 0. 5 goes into 36 times. 6 times 5 is 30. Subtract and get 0. And then make sure you bring your decimal point back up to exactly where it should be. And there's my answer right there, 2.86. Again, I will completely agree with you that the best way to add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals is probably pull out your calculator. However, occasionally you'll need to do it by hand. So please remember, when you're adding, you have to line up those decimal points. When you're multiplying, you're going to have to count how many numbers are behind the decimal point to figure out where it should be.